At 39 years old, Desmond Washington earned $128,000 a year as a transmission line engineer for Duke Energy. He was a man who understood pressure, resistance, and the steady, unseen flow of immense power. He could trace a fault line across 100 miles of North Carolina pines from a schematic on a screen in his uptown Charlotte office. His life, like the grid he managed, was built on principles of stability, predictability, and quiet strength. And it was all about to short circuit. The first tremor came not from a storm or a downed power line, but from a joke, tossed carelessly across the polished surface of a $1,900 crate and barrel dining table. "My work husband surprises me every day," his wife, Amara, said, her voice a light, musical laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. They were hosting another couple, friends from her marketing firm, in their sleek South Park condominium. The air was thick with the scent of a $90 diptyque candle and the expensive Pinot Noir Amara had insisted on, a $150 bottle that tasted to Desmond like any other red wine. "You never surprise me, sweetie." She patted his hand, a gesture that was meant to look affectionate but felt like a dismissal. The other couple, Mark and Lisa, chuckled, a little too loudly, a little too nervously. Desmond felt the familiar, dull ache of being the punchline. He was the sturdy, reliable husband, the good man, the provider. He was the foundation, but never the cathedral. He was the man who paid the mortgage on this $650,000 condo, who stocked the fridge with organic produce from Whole Foods, who made sure their 6-year-old daughter Zuri had the best of everything. He was the constant, the baseline from which Amara launched her dazzling, ambitious life. He manufactured a thin smile. "Well, somebody has to keep the lights on," he said, a gentle quip that was his standard defense. It was true, both literally and figuratively. He spent his days ensuring a city of millions had power, and he spent his nights trying to power a marriage that was flickering like a faulty bulb. Amara's beautiful, deep brown skin glowed under the recessed lighting, her elegant twists piled high on her head. She was wearing a new silk blouse, probably worth $400, that he hadn't seen before. He was in his usual off-duty uniform, a comfortable $45 pair of jeans, and a plain gray t-shirt. The contrast between them was a silent, ongoing conversation. He had no idea that the work husband, a man named Tobias, was more than a joke. He had no idea that Amara's casual cruelty was a cover for a much deeper betrayal. And Amara, in her glittering world of status and ambition, had no idea that the quiet, predictable man sitting beside her was capable of a surprise so devastating it would burn her entire world to the ground. She had made a critical mistake. She had underestimated the man who knew, better than anyone, how to cut the power. What do you do when you realize the life you've built is a lie? Do you scream? Do you cry? Or do you just get very, very quiet? Let me know in the comments what you would have done in Desmond's shoes. The story of what he did next is a masterclass in quiet justice. The facade of their life was impeccable. It was a life curated for an audience, assembled piece by expensive piece. Their 2-bedroom condo in South Park, just a stone's throw from the luxury shops at the mall, was a testament to Amara's taste. The walls were a gallery of abstract art from a local gallery, each piece costing upwards of $1,500. The furniture was minimalist and modern, a matching set from a designer showroom that had set them back nearly $20,000. Desmond had winced at the price tag, but Amara had been insistent. "It's an investment in our lifestyle, Des," she'd said, running a hand over the smooth, gray fabric of an uncomfortable-looking sofa. "It's about projecting success." Desmond's success was projected from the 48th floor of the Duke Energy Center on South Tryon Street, a glass tower that scraped the sky. His corner office had a panoramic view of the city, a landscape of steel and concrete that he helped to animate with invisible energy. But his real life, the one that mattered, was in the details of home. It was in the Saturday morning spent at the kitchen island, Zuri perched on a stool beside him, her small hands helping him make pancakes. Zuri, with her bright eyes and the colorful beads braided into her hair that clicked when she turned her head, was the sun in his universe. Her laughter was the only currency he truly valued. Their home life, however, was a study in diverging priorities. Amara's version of domesticity involved ordering from gourmet meal kit services that cost $80 a box, which often sat unused in their $4,000 Sub-Zero refrigerator until she threw them out. Desmond's was packing Zuri's lunch every morning: a turkey and cheese sandwich, apple slices, a small bag of goldfish crackers, and a note written on a napkin. It was a simple, loving ritual that cost less than $5, but it was rich with a value Amara no longer seemed to recognize. One Tuesday evening, Desmond came home at 6:30 p.m. to find Amara getting ready to go out. She was standing in front of their walk-in closet, a space larger than his first apartment's kitchen, wrapped in a towel. She was contemplating two dresses. One was a stunning blue sheath dress he'd bought her for their anniversary, a $700 piece from a boutique in Noda. The other was a black dress he'd never seen before. "What do you think?" she asked, holding up the black one. "For a client dinner. Tobias says black is always a power move." The name landed in the quiet room like a dropped stone. Tobias, the work husband. "The blue one is beautiful on you," Desmond said, keeping his voice even. "It's not right for this," she dismissed, tossing the blue dress back onto a pile of clothes. "This is a big client. I need to look sharp." She settled on the new black dress, a $2,400 Burberry creation he would later learn she'd bought with money from their joint savings account. She paired it with a pair of $900 Jimmy Choo heels. As she leaned in to give him a perfunctory kiss on the cheek, he smelled a fragrance that wasn't hers. It was a rich, woody scent. Tom Ford's Oud Wood, he'd later identify it, a $295 bottle of another man's presence in his home. "Don't wait up," she said, grabbing her $3,000 Yves Saint Laurent handbag. "It's going to be a late one." Desmond watched her go, the click-clack of her expensive heels echoing down the hallway. He turned and walked into the living room. Zuri was on the floor, surrounded by crayons and paper. She was humming to herself, her small, deep brown fingers carefully coloring a picture. He sat down on the floor beside her, the hard, stylish floor a stark contrast to the worn but comfortable rug in his own house in Plaza Midwood, the house he'd bought before he even met Amara, the house that was currently being rented out. "What you drawing, sweet pea?" he asked. Zuri held up the paper. It was a drawing of their family, 3 figures rendered in the earnest, wobbly lines of a 6-year-old. She had used a brown crayon for all of them. On the left was a tall figure. "That's you, Daddy," she said, pointing. In the middle was a smaller figure with beaded braids. "That's me." She paused, her little brow furrowing. She pointed to the third figure on the far right, smaller than Desmond's, with a cloud of scribbled hair. "And that's Mommy." But then she did something that made Desmond's heart clench. She took a black crayon and drew a big, messy scribble over the figure of her mother, completely obscuring it. Then she took her brown crayon again and drew a new line, connecting her own hand directly to Daddy's. She looked up at him, her expression serious. "Just us," she said. It was a child's simple, devastating observation. She had felt the growing distance long before he had allowed himself to name it. He hugged her tight, the smell of crayons and clean kid smell filling his senses. He was holding on to the only part of his life that still felt real. The facade was cracking, and through the fissure, a terrible truth was beginning to seep in. The outrage began to accumulate in small, painful deposits, like silt clouding a clear stream. Each of Amara's casual cruelties, each dismissive comment, was a new layer of sediment, slowly burying the man Desmond used to be. The work husband joke became a recurring theme, a blunt instrument she used to chip away at his confidence in front of friends, family, and even, on one mortifying occasion, his own colleagues. They were at a Duke Energy Company picnic at Freedom Park. It was a relaxed, family-friendly event. Desmond was proud of his work, proud of his team. He'd just been explaining to one of Amara's friends the complexities of restoring power after a major hurricane, the satisfaction of seeing the lights come back on, neighborhood by neighborhood. Amara drifted over, a plastic cup of white wine in her hand. "Oh, don't let him bore you with all that technical stuff," she said with a laugh, waving a dismissive hand. "He's my Mr. Reliable. So steady. It's Tobias at my office who's the real spark plug. Full of ideas. He's always telling me I should be running my own agency by now." The friend smiled weakly. Desmond felt a hot flush of shame creep up his neck. He saw a couple of his own junior engineers nearby, pretending not to listen. In that moment, he wasn't a respected senior engineer managing a multi-million-dollar infrastructure. He was just Mr. Reliable, the boring husband. The insult was public, sharp, and designed to diminish him. He said nothing, just turned back to the grill and flipped a burger, the sizzle of the patty a poor substitute for the angry words caught in his throat. The financial betrayals were more insidious. Amara had always been the one who handled their discretionary spending, a category that seemed to expand each month. She spoke of their finances with a strange duality. In one breath, she would lament their inability to afford a lavish vacation. "Mark and Lisa are going to Bali for 2 weeks, she sighed one evening, scrolling through her Instagram feed on her $200 iPhone. "It must be nice. If you just had a little more ambition, Desmond, pushed for that director role, we could have things like that." The director role she mentioned came with a grueling travel schedule and internal politics he had no interest in. His current job provided them with an excellent life, a combined income well over $200,000 a year. They weren't wanting for anything. Yet in Amara's eyes, they were perpetually falling short. "We're just treading water," she'd say. "I want to swim." The next week, she came home with a new watch on her wrist, a $4,500 Cartier tank. "What's this?" Desmond asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Oh, this old thing?" she said, feigning nonchalance. It was a gift from a client. They were so happy with the new campaign. It was a lie. He felt it in his gut. A client didn't give a marketing manager a watch that cost more than his first car, a 1998 Honda Accord he'd driven for 10 years. But he didn't challenge her. He just nodded, adding it to the growing pile of evidence in the back of his mind. He was still in the dark, but his instincts, the same instincts that could sense a looming power surge on the grid, were screaming that something was fundamentally wrong. The cruelty wasn't just about money or public put-downs. It was in the small, intimate moments. It was in the way she'd turn her back to him in their king-sized bed, the vast space between them, feeling like a canyon. It was the way her phone was always angled away from him, the screen dimming quickly if he walked into the room. It was the nights she came home late, smelling of that expensive cologne and cheap excuses. "Long meeting," she'd murmur, kicking off her heels. "We were just brainstorming. Tobias is a genius, but he can talk for hours." One night, Zuri had a bad dream and crawled into their bed. She nestled between them, a warm, small presence in the cold expanse. Desmond wrapped an arm around her, but Amara shifted away, sighing with theatrical impatience. "I can't sleep like this," she whispered harshly. "She's all over me." She got up and went to the guest room. Desmond lay there in the dark, his daughter breathing softly beside him. and felt a profound, bottomless loneliness. This was his wife, the woman he had vowed to build a life with, and she was repelled by the presence of her own child. The woman who spoke of projecting success and investing in our lifestyle couldn't invest a few hours of comfort in her own family. The final and perhaps most galling outrage came during a conversation about Zuri's future. Desmond had been researching 529 college savings plans. He'd created a spreadsheet, projecting costs and contribution levels. "I think if we put in $500 a month, we can have her covered for a state school by the time she's 18, he said, showing Amara his laptop. Amara glanced at the screen, her expression one of profound boredom. $500 a month? Desmond? That's a lot. We're stretched so thin right now." Stretched thin? She had a closet full of clothes with the tags still on them. Their condo was filled with objects that cost more than a semester's tuition at UNC Charlotte. "We need to be thinking bigger," she continued, her voice taking on a condescending lecture-like tone. "It's not about nickel and diming for a state school. It's about creating a life where we can just write a check for Harvard. It's about generating real wealth, not just managing a salary." Tobias gets that. He's starting his own consulting business on the side. That's where the real money is. She was complaining about a $500 investment in their daughter's future while championing the speculative venture of her work husband. The hypocrisy was staggering. The disrespect, not just to him but to Zuri, was a wound that would not heal. He closed the laptop. "You're right," he said, his voice flat. "We should be thinking bigger." She smiled, believing she had won the argument. "I'm glad you're finally starting to see it my way." He had no idea how right he was. He had no idea that the conversation wasn't theoretical. Amara wasn't just championing Tobias's business. She was funding it. With their money. With Zuri's future. The outrage had finished accumulating. It was now a solid mass in his chest, dense and heavy and cold. It was time to start tracing the fault line. The discovery happened at 6:47 a.m. on a Saturday morning. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the South Park condo, the sky a bruised purple. The city was still mostly asleep. Amara was asleep in the guest room again, a migration that had become more frequent over the past few months. Zuri was a warm lump under her unicorn-themed comforter in her own room. The only sounds were the drumming of the rain and the quiet hum of the refrigerator. For Desmond, these early weekend mornings were a sanctuary, a time to pay bills, organize his thoughts, and drink his coffee in peace before the day's demands began. He sat at the expensive dining table, his old $700 Dell laptop, a starkly practical object in the sea of curated aesthetics. He was logged into their joint Bank of America account, methodically going through the previous month's statement. It was a habit born of his engineering mindset. Verify the inputs, check the outputs, ensure the system is balanced. He saw the usual entries. The mortgage payment for $3,100, a Whole Foods charge for $287.54, Amara's Neiman Marcus bill for $1,843.22, a figure that made his jaw tighten but was tragically familiar. And then he saw it. A line item that didn't belong. March 12, 2023, electronic funds transfer to Tobias Vantage LLC. Amount $4,800. The name hit him like a physical blow. Tobias. Not just Tobias, but a company. Tobias Vantage LLC. It wasn't a restaurant. It wasn't a store. It was a direct transfer of a significant amount of money. His mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Vantage? Amara had said Tobias was full of ideas, that he was starting a consulting business. Vantage. The name reeked of the kind of empty corporate jargon Tobias probably spouted. His heart began to beat a heavy, frantic rhythm against his ribs. His hands, usually so steady they could handle a live wire, felt cold and clumsy on the trackpad. With a trembling finger, he clicked on the transaction details. Nothing. Just the name and the amount. He navigated back to the main account page and used the search function. He typed Tobias Vantage LLC into the search bar and set the date range for the last year. He hit enter, the screen refreshed, and Desmond's world tilted on its axis. It wasn't just one payment, it was a list. February 10th, 2023, $6,200. January 15th, 2023, $5,500. December 18th, 2022, $8,000. November 20th, 2022, $7,500. The list went on and on, a neat column of betrayals stretching back 8 months. Each transfer was for thousands of dollars. He quickly opened the calculator app on his laptop. His fingers flew across the keys, adding the numbers. The total stared back at him from the screen, a sterile, brutal figure. $64,000. $64,000. Gone. Funneled from their joint savings, the money they were supposedly stretching thin, the money that wasn't there for their daughter's college fund, into this man's company. This work husband. The room suddenly felt airless. He stood up and walked to the window, resting his forehead against the cool, rain-streaked glass. The city lights below blurred into a meaningless smear. The rain was coming down harder now, a torrent that matched the storm, breaking inside him. He thought of her words. "We're stretched so thin. If you just had a little more ambition." Tobias gets it. It wasn't just financial infidelity. This was a conspiracy. This was a sustained, calculated deception that had been happening under his nose for the better part of a year. The late nights, the new clothes, the secret smiles at her phone, it all coalesced into a single horrifying picture. She wasn't just having an affair. She was building a new life with another man, using Desmond's money as the foundation. He felt a wave of nausea. He backed away from the window and sank into one of the stylish, uncomfortable $3,000 chairs. He felt nothing. The rage he expected wasn't there. The sorrow he should have felt was absent. In their place was a profound and terrifying clarity. It was the same feeling he got in the control room just before a planned blackout, when the entire system had to be shut down with methodical precision. He went back to the laptop. His movements were now slow, deliberate. He opened a new browser tab. He typed Tobias Vantage LLC into Google. The first result was a bare-bones website full of stock photos of diverse teams in glass-walled conference rooms and buzzwords like synergy, optimization, and paradigm shift. The second result was more useful. The North Carolina Secretary of State Business Registration Portal. He clicked the link. He searched for the company name, and there it was, Tobias Vantage LLC, organized on July 27, 2022. Registered agent, Tobias Reed. Principal office address, a high-end apartment complex in Ballantyne. He took a screenshot. He went back to the bank website and one by one he downloaded every monthly statement for the past year. He saved them to a new, password-protected folder on his desktop. He named the folder Project Takedown. The rain had stopped. The first rays of a weak, watery sun were breaking through the clouds. A new day was dawning. For Desmond, it was the first day of a new life. The life of a man who had been underestimated. The life of a man who was done being the punchline. The life of a man who was about to plan a surprise of his own. The 3 weeks that followed were the most difficult of Desmond's life. He was living inside a pressure cooker, the steam of his fury and grief building with each passing day, but he knew he had to keep the lid on tight. Any premature explosion would ruin everything. He had to act normal. He had to play the part of the steady, unsuspecting husband while he meticulously gathered the ammunition he would need. His temperature was still, his composure gift-wrapped. The first test came that very same Saturday, just hours after his discovery. Amara finally emerged from the guest room around 10 a.m., yawning. She was wearing a $250 silk pajama set. "Morning," she said, heading straight for the $1,500 Nespresso machine. "Did Zuri eat?" Pancakes? Desmond said, not looking up from the newspaper he was pretending to read. She's watching cartoons. He let the silence stretch for a moment, then he delivered the first probe. Hey, I was looking at our budget this morning, he said, his tone casual, almost bored. I saw some payments to a company called Vantage LLC. What's that about? He watched her over the top of the paper. Amara didn't even turn around. She was focused on frothing her milk. Oh, that, she said, her voice airy and dismissive. It's a work thing. We're using some outside consultants for the big Q4 pitch. It's a departmental expense. Gets reimbursed. The lie was so smooth, so effortless, it stole his breath. She didn't even flinch. She was telling him, to his face, that a $64,000 drain on their personal savings was a reimbursable work expense. It was a new level of contempt. He felt a cold, hard knot form in his stomach. He just nodded. Ah, okay, makes sense. He folded the newspaper and went to Zuri's room. He needed to see his daughter. He needed to anchor himself to something real. He spent the rest of the day playing with her, building Lego towers and reading stories, his every action a shield against the torrent of emotions inside him. Every laugh from Zuri was a reminder of what he was fighting for. Scene by scene, lie by lie, he built his case. A few days later, he found a receipt in the pocket of a jacket Amara had worn. It was from a restaurant in the South End, the Waterman Fish Bar. It was for a late dinner, timestamp 10:45 p.m. on a Tuesday. She had claimed to be stuck at the office. The bill was for 2 people, 2 orders of the pan-seared scallops, 4 glasses of expensive Sancerre. The total was $184. He knew she hadn't been with a client. This was a date. He photographed the receipt and saved it to the folder. Another evening, her phone, which she had carelessly left on the kitchen counter, lit up with a text notification. The screen lock showed the sender, Tobias. The message read, "That hotel in Asheville is booked. King Suite with a mountain view. Can't wait." Desmond's blood ran cold. He felt a visceral urge to smash the phone against the granite countertop. Instead, he took a deep, steadying breath. He walked away. He went into his home office, a small nook off the living room, and made a note of the date and time. An affair wasn't just about stolen money and late-night meetings. It was about stolen futures, stolen weekends, stolen intimacy. They were planning a trip with the money she was stealing from her own family. He played the part of the dutiful husband perfectly. He listened to her complain about her boss. He rubbed her shoulders when she said she was stressed. He feigned interest when she talked about the upcoming office holiday mixer, an event she was in charge of organizing. "It has to be perfect, Des," she said one night, scrolling through catering menus on her tablet. "It's my chance to really shine. Mr. Henderson, my boss, will be there, all the senior partners. This is how you get noticed." "I'm sure it will be great, honey," he said, his voice a monotone. Inside, a plan was beginning to form. A cold, precise, and devastating plan. The mixer. Her moment to shine. It was the perfect stage. The most painful scene came 1 week before the strike. He came home to find Zuri crying. Her face was streaked with tears, her little body shaking with sobs. Her nanny, a kind young woman named Chloe, looked distraught. "What happened?" Desmond asked, kneeling and pulling Zuri into his arms. "Amara was supposed to take her to her friend Sophie's birthday party," Chloe explained in a low voice. "She promised, but she called an hour ago and said a work emergency came up and she couldn't make it." Zuri buried her face in Desmond's chest. "Mommy forgot," she hiccuped. "She said she would come. We were going to the bouncy castle." The work emergency, Desmond knew, was a lie. He had overheard Amara on the phone earlier that day, confirming a strategy session with Tobias at a hotel bar uptown. She had chosen him over her daughter's tears. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. He held Zuri tight, rocking her gently. Hey, hey, it's okay, sweet pea, he murmured. How about this? You and me, we'll go get ice cream. Any flavor you want? And then we'll go to the park. Just us. Zuri looked up, her tears subsiding. With sprinkles? All the sprinkles in the world, he promised. As he buckled her into her car seat, he caught his reflection in the rearview mirror. His face was a calm, unreadable mask, but his eyes, he realized, looked like a stranger's. They were cold, hard, and focused. The doting husband was gone. In his place was an engineer of consequences, a man who was about to flip a switch and plunge someone's world into darkness. He had played dumb long enough. It was time to get smart. Desmond's first call was not to a friend or a family member, but to a name he found through the North Carolina Bar Association website. He was looking for the best family law attorney in Charlotte, someone sharp, discreet, and formidable. He found Ms. Carol Avery. Her office was not in a flashy uptown skyscraper, but in a beautifully restored brick building in the 4th Ward, a place that suggested quiet, established power rather than noisy ambition. At 9 a.m. on a Monday morning, Desmond sat across a heavy mahogany desk from a woman who radiated competence. Ms. Avery was a black woman in her late 50s, her hair styled in elegant silver-streaked locks. She wore a tailored navy blue suit that probably cost more than his, but it was the intelligence in her eyes that commanded the room. She listened without interruption as Desmond laid out the facts, his voice low and even. He didn't speak of heartbreak or betrayal. He spoke of dates, transaction numbers, and corporate filings. When he was finished, he pushed a slim, black 1 terabyte external hard drive across the desk. It was a $59 purchase from Best Buy, but it contained a meticulously organized portfolio of Amara's deception. On this drive, Desmond said, you will find a folder for each month of the past year. Inside each folder are the complete bank statements with the relevant transactions highlighted. There are also screenshots of the LLC registration for Tobias Vantage LLC, a timeline of my wife's excuses for her absences, and photographic evidence of receipts and text messages where available. The total amount transferred from our joint savings to this LLC is $64,350. Ms. Avery picked up the hard drive, weighing it in her hand. She looked at Desmond, a flicker of professional appreciation in her eyes. Mr. Washington, she said, her voice a smooth, deep alto. Most people come in here with tears and accusations. You've come in with a ledger. This is good. This is very, very good. She plugged the drive into her computer. For several minutes, the only sound was the soft clicking of her mouse as she navigated the files he had so carefully compiled. She paused on the LLC filing. Tobias Reed, she read aloud. And your wife is Amara Washington, a marketing manager at, what's the firm? Sterling Cooper Marketing, in South Park, Desmond replied. Tobias Reed is a senior creative director at the same firm. Ms. Avery's eyes lit up with a predator's gleam. Oh my, so she's been funneling marital assets to a co-worker's private business venture. Do you know if this co-worker, Mr. Reed, has ever done business with Sterling Cooper or any of their clients? I don't know for sure, Desmond said. But Amara mentioned the LLC was for consulting. It seems likely. It's more than likely it's a massive conflict of interest, Ms. Avery said, a slow smile spreading across her face. Potentially even corporate fraud, if they've used company resources or client relationships to benefit his side business. The firm's ethics clause will be airtight on this. This isn't just a divorce, Mr. Washington. This is a detonation. They spent the next hour mapping out the strategy. Ms. Avery explained the legal landscape. Because Desmond's house in Plaza Midwood was pre-marital property, it was untouchable. His Duke Energy 401k and pension, accrued mostly before the marriage, were also largely protected. The primary battle would be over the marital assets, specifically the equity in the South Park condo and the money Amara had stolen. We will file for divorce on the grounds of adultery and financial malfeasance, Miss Avery stated. We will subpoena the full financial records of Tobias Vantage LLC. We will file for an unequal distribution of marital property, demanding the return of the $64,000 she misappropriated. We will make her pay for your legal fees. Given the evidence you've provided, we will win. It's just a matter of how and when we strike. That's when Desmond told her about the holiday mixer. He described the event, Amara's role as the host, her desperation to impress her boss, Mr. Henderson. Ms. Avery leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled. She looked at Desmond with newfound respect. At her moment of triumph, she murmured, public, precise, humiliating. Mr. Washington, you are colder than I thought. She underestimated me, Desmond said simply. She called me predictable. She will not make that mistake again, Ms. Avery assured him. The plan they devised was worthy of a military operation. Ms. Avery would hire a process server, a professional who specialized in delivering legal documents in public settings. He would be given a photo of Amara. At the same time, Ms. Avery would prepare a second package. This one would not be a legal filing, but a courtesy notification for Amara's boss, Mr. Henderson. It would contain copies of the bank statement showing the transfers from Amara to Tobias, a copy of the LLC registration, and a cover letter drafted by Ms. Avery, politely highlighting the potential ethical and legal breaches this represented for his firm. This package would be delivered by a bonded courier at the exact same moment. The cost for this coordinated strike would be significant. Ms. Avery's retainer was $10,000. The process server and courier would be another $500. The initial filing fees, another $1,000. But Desmond didn't hesitate. He transferred the money from his personal savings account, an account Amara didn't even know existed. It was an investment in his future, an investment in Zuri's future, an investment in justice. As he left Ms. Avery's office and walked out into the crisp autumn air of the Fourth Ward, Desmond felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The grief and rage were still there, but they had been transformed. They were no longer a chaotic storm inside him. They were fuel. They were the power source for the meticulously planned machine of consequences he was about to set in motion. The engineer was back in the control room. Have you ever had to make a choice between your emotions and a strategic plan? It's one of the hardest things to do, but sometimes it's the only way to get justice. Let us know your thoughts below. The climax of this story is coming, and it's a moment you won't want to miss. The South Park Social, the venue Amara had chosen for the Sterling Cooper holiday mixer, was a cathedral of modern wealth. It was all glass walls, soaring ceilings, and minimalist furniture that cost a fortune to look so simple. Waitstaff in crisp black uniforms moved through the crowd with trays of champagne and elaborate hors d'oeuvres. A jazz trio played softly in the corner, their music a tasteful, expensive backdrop. The air hummed with networking and ambition. It was Amara's perfect world. Desmond arrived at precisely 8 p.m. He had dropped Zuri off with her Auntie Rose, his late mother's sister, a woman whose home in the university area was filled with warmth, the smell of baking bread, and unconditional love. He wore a simple dark gray suit from Brooks Brothers, a $400 purchase from years ago, perfectly tailored. It was the uniform of a man who didn't need to shout to be seen. His shoes were polished, his locks were freshly twisted. He was an island of calm in a sea of performative chatter. He saw Amara immediately. She was holding court near the center of the room, a radiant smile fixed on her face. She was wearing the $2,400 Burberry dress, and she looked stunning. Her deep brown skin seemed to absorb the light. For a fleeting, painful moment, he remembered the woman he had fallen in love with, the woman whose laugh could light up a room. Then he saw Tobias standing next to her, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. The memory vanished, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. Amara spotted him and waved him over, her smile tightening almost imperceptibly. "Desmond, you made it. I was starting to worry." Her voice was bright, but her eyes scanned him, judging his simple suit, his quiet presence. He was an accessory that didn't quite match her outfit. "Wouldn't miss it," he said, his voice even. He leaned in and gave her a kiss on the cheek. It was like kissing marble. She turned to Tobias, who was smirking with the easy confidence of a man who believed he had already won. "Tobias, you know my husband Desmond." "The famous Desmond," Tobias said, extending a hand. His handshake was weak, his palm clammy. He wore a suit that was a size too small, straining at the shoulders, and a watch that was a cheap imitation of a Rolex. "Amara tells me so much about you. Says you're the rock, the steady one." "She does," Desmond said, his gaze unwavering. He held Tobias's eyes for a second longer than was comfortable, letting the man feel the chill. Tobias looked away first. Desmond excused himself and got a glass of water from the bar. From a discreet corner he watched them. He watched Amara laugh at something Tobias whispered in her ear. He watched her introduce Tobias to her boss, a portly man with a florid face named Mr. Henderson. She was glowing, triumphant. This was her night. She was the host, the star, the woman who had it all. At 8:14 p.m., Desmond's phone vibrated in his pocket. A simple text from a number he didn't recognize. "In position." It was the signal from Ms. Avery's team. He looked toward the entrance. A man in a nondescript gray jacket entered. The process server. He scanned the room, his eyes landing on Amara. At the same time, a second man, a courier in a professional uniform holding a large manila envelope, walked in and approached the reception desk, asking for Mr. Henderson. The clock on the wall ticked to 8:15 p.m. Amara was on a small, raised platform, tapping a microphone. "If I could have everyone's attention for just a moment," she began, her voice ringing with confidence. "I just want to thank you all for coming." As she spoke, the process server began to move through the crowd, his path direct and purposeful. Desmond watched, his heart a steady, slow drum. The jazz trio faltered, sensing a shift in the room's energy. Heads began to turn. The server reached the edge of the platform just as Amara was wrapping up her speech. "And here's to a successful and prosperous new year for all of us at Sterling Cooper." There was a smattering of applause. As it died down, the server stepped forward. "Amara Washington?" he asked, his voice clear and professional, cutting through the murmurs. Amara's smile froze. "Yes?" she said, confused. "Can I help you?" "You've been served," the man said, and he placed a thick, legal-sized envelope into her hand. A collective gasp went through the room. The silence was absolute. Amara stared at the envelope as if it were a snake. Her name was printed on the front, along with C.O. Carroll Avery, attorney at law. Simultaneously across the room, the courier approached Mr. Henderson. "Mr. Henderson, this is for you." He handed the portly boss the large manila envelope. Henderson took it, his expression bewildered. Amara's face had gone completely white. Her eyes darted around the room, wide with panic, searching for an explanation. They landed on Desmond. He stood perfectly still, his expression unreadable, his glass of water held steady in his hand. He met her gaze and gave a slow, deliberate nod. In that single silent gesture, she understood everything. This was not a random event. This was a strike. This was his surprise. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her triumphant smile had crumbled, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. Across the room, Mr. Henderson tore open the manila envelope. He pulled out the first page, the cover letter from Ms. Avery. His eyes scanned the first paragraph. Then he pulled out the next document, a copy of a bank statement. With a bright yellow highlight over the line, electronic funds transfer to Tobias Vantage LLC, $8,000. His face, already florid, deepened to a dark, apoplectic purple. He looked from the paper to Tobias, who had frozen mid-sip of his champagne, his own face a picture of dawning dread. Then he looked back at Amara, whose carefully constructed world was shattering around her in real time. The party was over. The music had stopped. The only sound was the frantic, panicked beat of two guilty hearts, broadcast to a room full of silent, staring witnesses. Amara looked at Desmond one last time, her eyes pleading, but the man she saw was a stranger. He simply turned and walked toward the exit, leaving her alone on the stage, in the ruins of her life. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. The consequences cascaded not with the chaotic fury of a natural disaster, but with the cold, methodical precision of a controlled demolition. Desmond had not just lit a match, he had triggered a series of perfectly placed charges that brought Amara and Tobias's world down around them. The first consequence was social. The holiday mixer devolved into a maelstrom of whispered gossip. Amara, left standing on the platform with the divorce papers in her hand, became a pariah in an instant. Her colleagues, who moments before had been congratulating her, now avoided her gaze, melting back into the crowd. She stumbled off the stage, her $900 Jimmy Choo heels unsteady on the floor. She tried to approach Mr. Henderson, but he held up a hand, his face a thunderous mask of fury, and turned his back on her. She was radioactive. The second consequence was professional. The very next morning, a Monday, Amara received an email from Human Resources summoning her to an 8:30 a.m. meeting. Tobias received the same email. They were not allowed to enter the main office, but were escorted to a small, windowless conference room. Mr. Henderson was there, along with the firm's head of HR and an in-house attorney. The evidence Desmond had provided, the bank statements, the LLC registration, was laid out on the table. The meeting was short. Amara was fired for gross misconduct, citing the ethics clause in her employment contract regarding conflicts of interest and misappropriation of resources. It was discovered she had used the company's client database to build a prospect list for Tobias. Her termination was effective immediately. Her $115,000 salary was gone. Her corporate Amex was canceled. She was given 15 minutes to collect her personal items from her desk, under the watchful eye of a security guard. Tobias was also fired, but for him, it was worse. The firm's lawyer informed him that they were launching a full internal investigation into Tobias Vantage LLC for potential fraud and intellectual property theft. His career in marketing was not just over at Sterling Cooper, it was likely over in Charlotte. His name was now poison. The third consequence was financial. Ms. Avery, armed with the termination letters, filed an emergency motion to freeze Amara's access to all remaining marital assets. A judge granted it within hours. Amara's credit cards were declined. The joint account she had been pillaging was now beyond her reach. She was locked out, financially suffocated. Then came the voicemails. They started as angry tirades and devolved into pathetic pleas. Desmond didn't answer. He let them go to his voicemail, each message a recording of her unraveling. The first, from 9:45 a.m. that Monday. Desmond, what have you done? You picked up the phone right now. You have no idea what you've just done. You've ruined me. Are you happy now? Are you happy? The voice was shrill, laced with rage and disbelief. The second, a few hours later, was laced with manipulative justification. Okay, look, I know how this looks, but you don't understand the pressure I was under. Tobias, he needed the help. It was an investment. For us. I was going to pay it all back. You have to call me so I can explain. The third, that evening, was soaked in desperation. Desmond, please, please pick up. They fired me. They fired Tobias. My key card doesn't work. I can't access our account. The credit card was declined at the grocery store. Desmond, I have no money. Please. What am I supposed to do? The fourth, near midnight, was just weeping. Sound of sobbing. I'm so sorry. Des, I'm so sorry. I made a mistake. A terrible, terrible mistake. Please, just talk to me. Don't do this to me. To us. Desmond listened to each message once, his face impassive. He saved them to the Project Takedown folder, renaming them Consequence 1, Consequence 2, and so on. This wasn't revenge. This was accountability. These were the direct results of her own choices, broadcast back to her in her own voice. The final, immediate consequence was the loss of her home. With no income and no access to funds, she couldn't afford the $3,100 monthly mortgage on the South Park condo. The divorce settlement, which she was forced to accept, was brutal. Desmond was awarded the full $64,350 she had transferred to Tobias, taken directly from her share of the condo's equity. After legal fees were paid from her portion as well, she walked away with less than $20,000 from the sale of the $650,000 property she had considered the pinnacle of her success. Within 6 weeks of the holiday mixer, Amara Washington, the woman who had everything, had lost her job, her reputation, her fiancé, her home, and her financial security. She had moved into a small one-bedroom apartment in a less fashionable neighborhood, a cramped space with thin walls and a view of a parking lot. The woman who worried about projecting success was now living a life of quiet failure, a consequence of underestimating the quiet, predictable man she had so carelessly betrayed. A year later, the world was a different place. The sleek, cold glass of South Park had been replaced by the warm, weathered wood of Plaza Midwood. The rain of that terrible Saturday morning had given way to the bright, clear sunlight of a Carolina spring. Desmond was home. Not in the condo that had been a stage for a life he never wanted, but in the 1940s bungalow he had bought a decade ago. A house with good bones, a sprawling oak tree in the backyard, and a soul. The house was no longer empty or occupied by renters. It was filled with the sounds of life. Zuri's laughter echoed from the backyard. The smell of Desmond's chili, simmering on the stove, filled the kitchen. The walls were not decorated with expensive, meaningless art, but with Zuri's vibrant, joyful drawings. In the backyard, nestled in the strong branches of the old oak tree, was Desmond's latest project, a magnificent tree house. It wasn't a kit bought from a store. It was built by hand, plank by plank. It had a real door, windows with shutters, and a small porch. It was a fortress of love, a testament to what a father could build with his own 2 hands. This Sunday afternoon, Desmond was on a small stepladder inside the treehouse, Zuri sitting cross-legged on the floor, watching him with rapt attention. He was teaching her something new. He had a small panel with a battery, a switch, and a tiny LED bulb. It was a simple circuit, a miniature version of the massive systems he managed every day. "Okay, see this?" he said, pointing with a screwdriver. "This is the battery. It's where the power is stored. And this is the wire. The power wants to travel from one side of the battery, through the wire, to the other side. But it can't, because of this." He pointed to the switch. "The switch is a bridge. Right now, the bridge is up. What do you think happens when we put the bridge down?" Zuri's eyes were wide with concentration. "The power can go across," she said, her voice full of excitement. "Exactly," Desmond said, smiling. He flipped the tiny switch. The little LED bulb flickered to life, casting a warm glow inside the treehouse. Zuri gasped with delight. "It's magic, Daddy." "It's not magic, sweet pea," he said softly, ruffling her beaded braids. It's just about making a connection, a real one, from the source all the way to the light. He felt a sense of peace so profound it almost brought him to tears. This was wealth, not a $4,500 watch or a $650,000 condo. It was this moment, teaching his daughter how things work, building something real and lasting, the steady, reliable flow of love between a father and his child. Later that evening, after Zuri was asleep, Desmond sat in his comfortable, worn armchair, a $300 piece he'd bought at a secondhand store years ago. He thought, for a moment, about Amara. He had heard through a mutual acquaintance that she was working as a cashier at a retail store, struggling to make ends meet. He felt a pang, not of satisfaction, but of a distant clinical pity. Her apology had come months ago, in a long, rambling letter. He had read it and felt nothing. He had already forgiven her, not for her sake, but for his. Forgiveness was the final switch he had to flip to cut power to the past and restore it to his own life. His gaze fell upon the refrigerator, which was covered in Zuri's artwork. Front and center, held by a magnet, was her latest masterpiece. She had drawn it just last week. It was a picture of the Plaza Midwood house, with the big oak tree in the yard. Two figures stood in front of it, rendered in her favorite brown crayon. One was a tall man with neat locks. The other was a small girl with bouncing braids holding his hand. Above them, in the sky, she had drawn a smiling sun, and underneath, in the determined scrawl of a child who was learning to write, were 4 simple words: Daddy, sus, me, forever. He got up and walked over to the drawing, tracing the crayon lines with his finger. This was his grid. This was his network. It wasn't vast or complicated. It was simple, strong, and true, and its light would never go out. The world teaches us to value the things that glitter, the promotions, the expensive objects, the life that looks good on the outside. But real value, true wealth, isn't projected. It's built. It's built in quiet moments of connection. It's built with patience, with love, and with the kind of strength that doesn't need an audience. It's about knowing what connections are real and which ones are just faulty wiring. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is cut power to what's broken, to protect the light that truly matters. Thank you for joining us on Love Beyond Pride. If this story of quiet strength and true fatherhood touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Share in the comments what you believe true wealth really is. We are so grateful to have you in our community, and we'll see you in the next story.